Does God want a separation of church and state? Should Christians be voting biblical principles? Does it really matter who you vote for? Join Pastor Jerry Cook as he endeavors to answer these and many other questions over the next hour on Politics in the Pulpit. And now, Pastor Jerry Cook.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today on Politics and the Pulpit here on your hometown station, 98.1 FM and AM 1220. We have an informative show for you today, as well as being joined in just a few moments by attorney Alexander Haberbush with the Lex Rex Institute out of Long Beach, right here in Southern California. And we'll be talking about the FBI raiding the Biden compound, and with Biden's full approval, of course. And we will also be talking about a federal jury acquitting pro-life activist Mark Houck, and we'll talk about that a little bit, who was taken from his home at gunpoint back in 2022 by the FBI as his wife and children watched in horror. Just before we have Alexander come on, I wanted to just give you a quick update on the ministry of Russ Miller that we had on last Wednesday, and then we had services with him on Sunday. We had great services, all three services on Sunday, full services, a lot of visitors, and a lot of skeptics who showed up, which is exactly what my intention was, because Brother Russ Miller was adept at handling some of those questions, especially Sunday evening, when he fielded I'd say about 12 or 13 questions from the skeptics in the crowd. And so I think he did a great job. And hopefully some of you out there that listened to the show last week, go on to creationministries.org. Check it out. He does, in the summer, once the weather gets a little warmer, he'll be doing some Grand Canyon tours and rafting tours there in the Grand Canyon. He has a lot of information and great food and great fellowship if you do it as a family or as a church group. On the line today is Alexander Haberbush with Lex Rex Institute here in Southern California. First of all, Alexander, say hello to the listeners and tell us a little bit about the Lex Rex Institute and what it does.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry, for having me on the program again. I appreciate the opportunity to get out here and talk about the Constitution and, the rights that we've been bequeathed by our forefathers, which is sort of the purpose of the Lex Rex Institute. So Lex Rex is Latin for the law is king. We believe the law is the highest king in the United States. In fact, that's not just our belief, that's actually stated in the Constitution. And we want to hold public officials accountable to that Constitution. Joe Biden's not our king. And if he were, maybe he could get away with some of this classified document stuff he's been trying to pull, but he's not. He's subject to the law, just as you and I are and everybody else is. So, yeah, Lex Rex is dedicated to constitutional advocacy. That involves both teaching the Constitution in contexts like this one, as well as representing clients to defend constitutional liberties, because that's the way that our system works. We have to defend things in court, or they don't get defended. So we step up, represent people who might not be able to pay for it themselves, and help them to defend constitutional rights.
How long has the Lex Rex Institute been practicing and involved in this?
Not too long. We just got started in March of 2021, so we're coming up on, what would that be, our second anniversary?
Yeah, second anniversary.
Yeah, coming up on that.
So you're pretty young, and of course, I met you at a political event just a few months back, and that started a burgeoning relationship. So thankful for that. What cases are you guys involved in at the moment, if you're able to talk about them?
Well, I'm sure, as you can imagine, based on when we started, a lot of our early casework was COVID-19 related.
Sure.
So mandates passed down by employers, restrictions that cities were imposing on businesses. We fought back against a lot of those things. Courts take forever in this country, so we're still wrapping up a lot of that stuff. We've been fairly successful on a lot of that, particularly if we dealt with things before they got to court. We had a very successful campaign where we'd write demand letters for people who were faced with mandatory vaccination at risk of losing their job, about a 90% success rate on those. We also work in the arena of election law. I was recently involved working for Kari Lake in Arizona. Just filed our brief on that last week. We're not sure what the outcome is yet, so keep your eyes open for that one, because that's an exciting one. In the past, did some work for President Trump, again on the election challenges in 2020. So, yeah, wide variety of stuff. Anything that involves constitutional rights is something that we are there to defend.
Now, I know that you have an involvement there with the Kari Lake campaign there in Arizona, and it's an ongoing saga. And I know that at liberty to speak at length about that, but let's be clear, at least to our listeners, Kari Lake is not wanting to undo the election of November, but rather to address the issues that occurred in Maricopa County, allegedly.
That's exactly right. Yeah. She doesn't want a court to just declare her the winner.
Yeah.
The relief that we're asking for is we want them to recognize that irregularity took place, that irregularity may have impacted the election, and if they think that it rises to that level, then they would hold a new election.
Yeah.
Where we don't have those kinds of irregularities.
And it seems interesting, just on a side note, if we could keep on to this topic, that Maricopa County tends to be one of the problem counties there in Arizona. I mean, it kind of became an issue in 2020 and here again 2 years later. I'm just wondering if they see a pattern.
Well, it's a pattern, yes, but if anything, we've actually seen the kind of irregularities that occurred in 2020 increase over the past 2 years. And that's part of the legal complaint that was issued against the county, is showing that you were aware of these problems. These problems occurred in the past election, and you did nothing to solve them. And when you do nothing to solve a problem that you're aware of, at best that is negligent. At worst, it starts to look like malfeasance.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Yeah, I always try to remind people that Kari Lake is doing this as a matter of principle, not some personal vendetta.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, let's turn our attention, if you will, to the classified documents. By sheer providence, of course, it seems like the FBI raided one of the many estates of the Bidens.
Well, I'm going to stop you there, actually, because what happened was not a raid. I want to be very clear of the distinction here. So what happened to former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, that was a raid.
Okay.
There was no announcement. They didn't say ahead of time that they were going to come in and rifle through all of his stuff.
Sure.
With President Biden, it was very different. His legal team was working with the FBI, coordinated this with the FBI, had every opportunity to clean the place, sanitize everything, find all the documents on their own before saying, all right, FBI, you can come in now and take a look at things. President Trump did not get that opportunity. And if you might recall, when that Mar-a-Lago raid went down, a lot of his attorneys were talking about, this is not at all customary for dealing with classified documents from a former president. Usually it'd be negotiated with the legal team.
Yeah.
Well, here's what that looks like. That's, Biden seems to get, every opportunity that President Trump didn't.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, that President Biden seems to have some lawyers that also double as Molly maids.
Yeah, that's, and I think that's kind of the sort of the implication behind this story is, what the heck were these lawyers doing looking around Biden's garage finding classified documents in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean, that's clearly not what happened. You don't pay people $1,000 an hour to look around your house and search for documents. You just don't. Those lawyers were well aware. I guess I shouldn't say that with certainty. I would say, based on my experience, I think it's a safe guess that those lawyers were well aware those documents were where they were ahead of time.
Yeah.
And either something mentioned in those documents was heating up in the news cycle or politically speaking, or, there may even be some inside information within the executive that we don't know about that makes those documents hot for whatever reason. And because of that, the lawyers, this is my guess, again, probably told Biden, you really got to release these. It's going to be really bad for them to leak later.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was listening to Dan Bongino this morning. I don't listen to him all the time, but he's been on this big tirade about the documents that are originally found at the Penn Biden Institute there had to do with Ukraine, or at least some of it had to do with Ukraine.
Yeah, they were fairly vague. I think, China, Ukraine, I think United Kingdom too, but foreign policy, I think, was the general thrust there.
Yeah, and so he was trying to make some sort of connections that, Biden is some sort of foreign guy, some sort of intrigue going on. I don't exactly know how it all connects, but anyway, that's Dan Bongino. Yeah. But nevertheless...
I don't want to speculate too much about what the contents were. I think the fact that he's admitting that he knew about these documents at least as early as, I think they said November 2nd, so about a week before the election, knew about these documents, knew they'd been stored improperly, and did nothing to inform anybody until January, I think that's egregious.
Yeah, the fact that, if you just put it on the other political foot, if this were a Republican president and these documents were found in November leading up to the midterms, but nothing was said until after the midterms, or in fact, a month and a half after the midterms. I'm sure the media, the legacy media, would be crying foul.
Well, I mean, a lot of comparisons have been made between this and what happened with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and I understand it. It's both about, classified documents that debatably shouldn't have been kept there. The big difference is that Trump took those documents thinking that he was able to declassify them, whether or not he was. Mm-hmm. The FBI was aware that he had those documents from the moment that he left office, and they were under lock and key. He had a Secret Service detail that was watching them. The entire reason why we classify documents in the first place is to ensure that documents are held securely.
Sure.
And if you took documents intentionally, at least you could make some kind of accommodation to make sure that happens.
Yeah.
If you're unaware that you have classified documents, it's virtually impossible that you were keeping them securely. And in fact, they weren't. They were in the trunk of President Biden's car, so they weren't being held securely at all. I'm not entirely sure why President Biden's legal team thinks the fact that he was unaware that he had these documents makes it any better for him. I think it makes it far, far worse.
Sure. Now, we've got the raid of Trump a few months ago. We've got the Biden classified documents in several locations, and then a week ago we had one or two markings as classified from Vice President Pence. So I guess the question to you is this: how serious are any of these charges, and is it normal for former VPs and presidents to have these documents after they leave office? And of course, you'd already kind of intimated that, President Trump thought to declassify, but how normal is this, and why is this like such a big deal now when this was never, ever something in the news just prior to Trump?
Well, the policy at issue here is one that actually dates back to the Obama administration. It's actually an executive order. I remember he passed a lot of those when he was in office. Executive Order 13526 relating to classification of documents and records. So, happened while Biden was vice president. He probably should have been aware of this, whether or not he was. But I think that's why this has come up in the news cycle a lot more often recently. It's also, just to be frank, I think probably most presidents, most executives have kept classified materials in ways that they should not have.
Sure.
Whether they returned it at the end of their term or not, I don't really know. I don't think anybody really knows. But I suspect that if things are done sloppily, they may not have.
Sure.
I think the reason this is heating up so much right now is, they're going to look for any gotcha they can with President Trump. We saw that his entire 4 years in office, even before he got into office.
Sure.
We saw that. And, once that's happened, you got to wait at least a little while before your side can start doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it looks very hypocritical if it turns out that, high-level Democrats are doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Which, of course, now it's turning out that maybe they did.
Yeah. Now, somebody had told me this morning that they thought that this whole Department of Justice and Merrick Garland, searching Biden's home was a somewhat of a ruse. In other words, Garland can now say, I'm neutral in this whole situation. I okayed things for the FBI to come into Biden's home, and I also okayed, quote, the raid for Trump. So I'm neutral in this. Your thoughts on that?
I think that that's largely correct. I think certainly this is a strategic thing from Biden's attorneys or the Biden administration that they can say, look, the exact same thing happened here as with Trump. Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, it's not the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Because Biden's attorneys cooperated every step of the way. Secondly, I think that really the special counsel is probably the best case for the fact that the Biden administration doesn't want to talk about this, and they're using procedure to get around that. They keep saying we've asked for a special counsel to be appointed. We're totally being transparent about the whole thing. It's really exactly the opposite, because once special counsel is appointed, everything goes into the dark.
Sure.
White House can start saying, we're not talking about this because now it's subject to a criminal investigation.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the reason why I think Merrick Garland's gotten involved in this, why a special counsel has been appointed, is so that Biden doesn't have to answer questions about this.
Mm-hmm. Because obviously we're not getting anything from Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House spokesperson.
Oh, of course not. And to be fair, I doubt that the press department of the White House. I doubt that they actually know a lot about this. It's not something that would necessarily go through the Oval Office. So that.
So we're actually going to give Jean-Pierre a little bit of slack here.
Well, that wasn't my intention to look at it that way, but yeah, I suspect this is, and apparently people who are fairly high up in the Biden administration have anonymously talked to reporters and said that communication's not real great in the Biden White House. Everything's kind of on a need-to-know basis. They're not informed of things until it directly affects whatever they're doing in their capacity.
Absolutely.
So my suspicion is that this stuff's being kept between President Biden and his attorneys.
No, I completely agree with that, and I appreciate your thoughts on that. And we're talking to Alexander Haberbush with the Lex Rex Institute here in Long Beach, California. When we come back on Politics in the Pulpit, we're going to talk about a pro-life activist by the name of Mark Houck, who was targeted by the FBI and was arrested at gunpoint at his home in front of his horrified wife and kids. I'm going to have, during this time here, I'm sure Alexander will probably just brief himself on that, but there's enough information out there to talk about it. Also, I'm going to, before we let Alexander go in the next cut here, I'm going to have him put on his theological hat, and we're going to talk a little bit about the distinctions between theonomy and a theocracy, and what are the differences, what are the similarities, and those kinds of things. And so when we return here on Politics in the Pulpit, we will deal with those issues. You guys stay in touch on your hometown station. We're back live here on your hometown station. This is Politics and the Pulpit with Pastor Jerry Cook, your holy host. Been pastoring the Freedom's Way Baptist Church in Santa Clarita for the last 21 years. And on our line today, we've got attorney Alexander Haberbush with the Lex Rex Institute out of Long Beach, California. And when we last left you, we were talking a little bit about the document scandal here with Biden and Trump and former Vice President Pence.
Yeah, everybody now.
Yeah, everybody, exactly.
Who doesn't keep classified documents?
Yeah, I what's funny is a couple of Sundays ago when I came to the pulpit, I said, this is your pastor, and no, I do not have any classified documents in my office. So because we recently cleaned my office.
But has the FBI come in and verified that?
No, they haven't.
Probably counts for nothing.
They haven't, but no, and I don't have a Corvette either. I was a little upset that
that'd be nice.
A Baptist minister could have one.
I'd probably prefer that over the classified documents, honestly.
I think so too. I think I'd be better off. But I kind of teased about this gentleman by the name of Mark Houck. He's a Catholic pro-life activist, and this story happened over the summer in 2022. According to some sources here, he was outside of a Planned Parenthood clinic in Philadelphia. And he had an altercation between himself and another Planned Parenthood client. And Mr. Houck was charged in September of 2022 with violating the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, which is called FACE, or the FACE Act. It's October 2021, with a Planned Parenthood volunteer escort, even though local authorities declined to pursue the case and a judge tossed the civil lawsuit out.
Right.
And so it wasn't until 2022 that FBI came in and basically at gunpoint, according to all of the stories that I've read, in front of his wife and children in the early wee hours of the morning, kind of like they like to do, and basically took him in chains and frog walked him out of his home. But according to a news I just heard on Monday, a federal jury acquits Mark Houck in a win for the pro-life movement. I'm sure you've heard about it. What are your thoughts about this? And what do you think what precedent does this set going forward with the Department of Justice pursuing this kind of silliness?
Yeah, well, this Department of Justice under Merrick Garland, I think, has been among the most, I'm not even sure what word to use, unrestrained, frankly, just exercising Gestapo tactics here to attack political enemies.
Yeah,
this is the first instance I know, the only instance I know of somebody who was harassed for being a pro-life activist. But certainly, many of the attorneys who were involved in President Trump's legal defense for the 2020 election have been treated in this manner. Jeffrey Clark's same exact thing happened, taken out of his house at gunpoint, middle of the night. Tina Peters, even Tina Peters' staff was treated in this manner. I don't know if you guys know about Tina Peters, but she was the Colorado election official who was ordered by her supervisor to destroy records of the election. When she didn't do so, she kept copies of those records with herself, was charged with violation of a state law. For whatever reason, federal government got involved in investigation there, again, raided her house. So we've seen this happening to lots of different people who are political opponents of the current administration's policies. I think this guy, in the story we're just talking about, I think this guy was charged initially with misdemeanor trespass, just for pushing somebody out of the way when they got in his face.
Yeah.
And the judge dismissed the charges. Then, I just want to be clear what happened. About a year later, federal government comes in with charges for violation of federal law, federal criminal law, this FACE Act, which, frankly, if you look at the text of the act, there's no way that his conduct is sufficient to constitute an offense under that act.
Well,
but, use that as sort of a guise to be able to raid his house, hold him at gunpoint, and humiliate him in front of his neighbors, and terrify him and his kids.
Yeah.
And this, unfortunately, has sort of become par for the course here. It's you don't hear about it on the news, but this kind of thing has been going on in basically every corner of this administration's political opposition. And I think it's a very, very dangerous thing.
Yeah, I don't think the administration was serious about actually having this guy, stand trial and actually be...
There's no way you could convict him.
Yeah, I think
it's something like 90% of people who are charged with federal crimes end up getting convicted. It's pretty easy to convict people in federal court, much easier than in most state courts, because most of these federal crimes are so broadly worded. But you look at this act, I don't think there's any way they could have pinned it on him. He would have been in the 10% that got off.
Exactly. I really think, and this is just me, putting on my my prophetic hat here, I'm thinking this is Merrick Garland and this Department of Justice saying, this is what happens to you if you are pro-life and you have a voice, and here's possibly what could happen. There's a shroud of doubt.
Just scare a few people into not doing it. I think you're exactly right. I don't know if you remember, the day after the Supreme Court's decision came down in Dobbs, that was the case that overturned Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
Merrick Garland, on behalf of the Justice Department, issued a statement saying, basically, the Justice Department resolutely and resoundingly rejects this ruling that's come out of the Supreme Court. I have never seen something like that from the head of a federal bureau.
I had totally forgotten about that. You're right.
Someone who works directly under the president, somebody who is responsible for upholding the rule of law in this country, to blatantly say, I disagree with the interpretation of the high court, and not just me, but my agency disagrees with it. At that point, that looks very close to departments going rogue from the rest of government, because that is not adherence to his constitutional duty. I think that we have a very dangerous Justice Department right now.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that I think it's going to get even more scary as we continue on here, because there just seems to be a lot of targeting going on, not only with the pro-life folks, but of course folks that are politically on the other side of the thing. And what's interesting is I was just saying this to a friend the other day. It seems like everything they blamed the previous administration of doing, they are in fact doing.
Yeah.
I mean, projection there's a lot of projection happening, if you will.
Right. Well, I don't think anybody could have claimed that the FBI was in Trump's pocket.
Not at all.
But it certainly does seem to look that way right now. I've been shocked by some of the stuff coming out of the Justice Department.
No doubt about it. Well, I want to change course here just for briefly, if I could, Alexander, and have you put on your theological hat on for just a few moments. And I wanted to talk
real quick on that, just to finish up.
Go ahead.
It's not hopeless. We are fighting these fights. I've been retained by a number of people who have been unjustly targeted by the Justice Department, as well as several public lawsuits are involved on this. I've been doing a lot of work with Mike Lindell and the cell phone seizure, which I think is another example. His cell phone was basically unlawfully seized by the FBI on account of suspicions that were levied against Tina Peters, again, person I mentioned earlier, and we're fighting that lawsuit. So we are fighting this. Yeah. And, I'm confident we can put a stop to it, but it's certainly bad right now. Yeah, well,
we could probably have a whole show on Mike Lindell and the fact that he was at a Hardee's restaurant ordering something, and they ended up raiding him there.
Yeah, it came out of the drive-through. Two unmarked vehicles, vehicles that were not in any way identifiable as police vehicles, stopped him. Basically one in front of his car, one behind it. He's lucky that he just come back from a hunting trip. They're lucky that he wasn't, spooked by all that.
Well, they probably look like elk or deer. You never know, but
right.
but they've tried to destroy him. There's no doubt about that. I remember years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, maybe longer, when the whole My Pillow phenomenon started, and I used to think to myself, man, this guy's everywhere. He's on commercials, he's in the Walmart stores, he's everywhere. And then he came out so strong for President Trump and spoke at a few events, and I'm like, wow, they went after him. It was like so quick, and now you have all these stores, saying, hey, we're not going to carry his stuff, and basically the only time I ever hear about him is really through conservative media.
Yeah.
And it is amazing how they've attempted to break him, and basically cause him to go broke. But anyway, I'm still glad that he's out there doing what he's doing, and obviously he came up real short when it came to the RNC choice the other day with Ronna McDaniel and Harmeet Dillon. But nevertheless, I'm glad he's still out there. But obviously, the name Lex Rex doesn't ring bells for some of our Christian brothers and sisters out there, except for a few of us hardcore guys.
Hopefully it will now.
Yeah, hopefully. And
yeah.
Ironically, we're having our church, Freedom's Way Baptist, is having a Lex Rex conference on May 22nd and 23rd, and we've got Pastor Jared Longshore from Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho, which of course is pastored by Doug Wilson up there, and of course Wilson and him and a few other speakers were just down in Torrance a few weeks ago speaking at another conference. But obviously, with the world in disarray, politics just absolutely, at the forefront, and the fecklessness of the broader evangelical church out there not knowing what to do, it seems as if theonomy has kind of made a resurgence in the last several years. And I think with guys like Banson and Wilson kind of spearheading it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But why did you go with Lex Rex for the name of the Institute? And did it have anything to do with maybe reading Rutherford's book, or how did that come about?
Oh, it absolutely did. And the reason why, for those listening, the reason why Jerry asks about Rutherford's book is Rutherford was a 17th century pastor in
Scotland.
In Scotland, in Scotland. And he wrote a book called Lex Rex. So that's the origin of our name. He's the first to use that name. We are not the first to appropriate that. And, I would say that book sort of guided my philosophy of law, of the fact that, magistrates exist under a higher power.
Yeah.
And that higher power, you can trace it ultimately up to God.
Yeah.
But there are also lower magistrates who are appointed underneath that.
Sure.
In the United States context, that's the United States Constitution. So all people are subject. Anybody that works in our government is subject, first and foremost, obviously, to God. But they're subject to the things that are beneath God as well. So Lex Rex is meant to remind people of the fact that our leaders are not our kings. Our king in this country is the Constitution.
Yeah. How influential do you think? Now, let me rephrase this. We know that studying history, that the book by Sir William Blackstone, Commentaries on the Laws of England, was instrumental with our founding fathers and the laws to this country. In what ways, if any, was Rutherford's book instrumental in some of our founding fathers' thinking?
Well, I taught a class on this about a year and a half ago that I called, sort of the unofficial title was The Road to the American Independence. And you might think, when do we start in that class? Do we start in 1760 if we're trying to get to 1776? No, it turns out we actually start in the BC era.
Wow. Okay.
And, we look first at, obviously the Torah. We look at the law that God gave through the Ten Commandments. We see how that influenced subsequent societies. We look at Cicero. We look at Aristotle.
Yep.
And we see how that evolves through the centuries. And one of the real strike points. So one of the very important pivotal moments in this whole sort of, quest for political freedom is the Protestant Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I almost said revolution.
Yeah, be careful.
The Protestant Reformation. Because what you end up getting in the Protestant Reformation is obviously the idea of questioning religious authority.
Mm-hmm.
But once you've questioned religious authority, once the Pope is no longer the guy who's in charge and telling you what to do, who are you answerable to? Because the answer can't be nobody. You don't want the answer to be nobody. You get options like in Munster with the Anabaptists taking over and sort of turning it into a lawless. Well, they try to impose their own law, but sort of a law unto themselves. You don't want that option. You still want people to be subject to an authority that's above them.
Yeah.
So the authority that ends up being identified during the Reformation period is, of course, Scripture itself. And that's where you get sola scriptura. But in a political realm, just the extent to which Scripture and the manner in which Scripture should inform laws and actions of magistrates is a hotly debated subject.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what gets worked out through that era. You see in the period in which Lex Rex was written, you see a number of other very similar texts. The one by Junius Brutus, which is a pen name, I think, but I'm forgetting. It's like the extent to which lower magistrates must be obeyed or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You get, contra, my Latin's horrible, but contra vindice tyranno, something like that from the Huguenots in France. A lot of texts basically writing on the subject of when is it appropriate for us to defy people who have been put in authority over us, because we know Romans 13, civil magistrates appointed by God.
Sure.
When is it appropriate for us to defy those people and act on the basis of a higher authority?
Yeah.
Whether that's the law those people are subject to or ultimately whether that's the law of God.
Yeah.
And you get sort of a whole exposition and theory of when that's appropriate. And our founding fathers were very much the inheritors of that tradition, and they were acutely aware of the arguments that had been made. You can find this in a lot of the work of James Otis, who was very sadly died a few years before the American War of Independence took place, but he wrote on a lot of these subjects. So did Samuel Adams. You can find it in the writings of James Wilson, who actually was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. But you see that they didn't take it for granted at all that what they were doing here in saying we are not subject to the British Parliament. They didn't take for granted at all that was sort of an extreme move. Yeah. But they thought that they had the justification to do it. And I think that's what makes our revolution, if you want to call it that, our independence movement, very, very different from all the others that have taken place throughout the history of the world. Because most of them just said, we're done with authority. And they threw it out, and they replaced it with something that basically they made up, and it didn't work. Yeah. Whereas our founding fathers, that was not true at all. They believed that the British Crown and the British Parliament was the one that was flagrantly disregarding the law, and they viewed themselves as the ones upholding it. And I think that's what accounts for the difference here.
No, I agree, and I think that's good. And, really, it was really in 2020 when, the world came to a crashing halt because of the COVID situation that I dusted off my Rushdoony books and a few other things that I had in my library, and I started reading through those things again. And of course, I was one of those individuals that refused to close my church. I didn't close it even for 1 week because I was under the impression that if God started his work, he was going to close it if he saw so fit. Right. So I didn't feel like I could unilaterally just say, yeah, we're going to close it for who knows how long.
It's ordered that you'll meet on the Lord's day, and I don't see an exception there.
Yeah, no exception clause. Exactly. And so I was being criticized by some of my preacher friends that within my own fellowship, as well as broader evangelicalism, sending me emails and things like that saying, you're embarrassing the evangelical church, blah, blah, blah. You should just go ahead and close down for a few weeks and just until we figure out what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And I just kept thinking to myself, wait a minute here. Why? Why are we going to do this? And I felt like there was a dearth of understanding of Romans 13, and I started to look through my Bible and started saying, well, here you have the women in Exodus chapter 1 telling the Pharaoh, we're not going to abide by your unjust law of killing the innocent humans, right. Especially the male kids. We're just going to go ahead and just listen to what God says, and so we're not going to do that, and so. And then you've got, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You've got Daniel himself. You've got all kinds of places in the Word of God where they just said, forget it.
Right, the whole book of Daniel is about that, right? Because it's written to the Maccabees, who were under basically a hostile, oppressive, and foreign government. So they looked at how did Daniel act when he was under the Babylonians, and it's really a whole book about exactly how we ought to act when faced with unjust government.
Exactly. When we come back here on Politics in the Pulpit, again, we're talking to Alexander Haberbush. We'll keep him for about 5 more minutes if we can, Alexander. I wanted to just quickly draw the distinctions between theonomy and a theocracy and how this is understood within broader evangelicalism, because obviously you and I are kind of probably an anomaly with some of our evangelical brethren out there. But anyway, if we could do that. But again, you're listening to Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station, AM 1220 and 98.1 FM. We'll come right back with Alexander Haberbush. We're back here on your hometown station with Politics in the Pulpit. This is your holy host, Pastor Jerry Cook, here on AM 1220 and 98.1 FM. We are talking with Alexander Haberbush with Lex Rex Institute here in Long Beach, California. And I wanted to just quickly get your closing thoughts on the Mosaic Law and how that should influence our thinking and our law.
Sure. Yeah, well, it's as a lawyer, I'm kind of loath to state my own opinion, but what I'll say is that the law of Moses certainly and absolutely has been influential on our legal tradition in this country.
Yeah.
If we're a system of precedent, and if that's something that's been relied on as authoritative for thousands of years up to this point, then I think that we're obliged to continue to pay that some credence.
Yeah. And what's interesting is we still have, at least as far as I know, in many of our there in Washington, D.C., we've got the Law of Moses in many of our places of politics. I mean, displayed prominently, and of course until what's his name? What is that? Moore there in Arkansas or Alabama?
Yeah.
I forget that guy's name right now. But remember, there was that big brouhaha a decade ago about whether or not the Ten Commandments could be displayed in his courthouse.
Yeah.
But I always thought to myself, what is the problem of having those 10 things displayed in a courthouse when that is a court of law?
Yeah, well, they've totally misunderstood one of the religion clauses of the First Amendment, but I think that's probably a subject for a different episode. But, suffice it to say that it was not the Founding Fathers' vision for the interaction of church and state.
No, there's no doubt about that, because obviously we've got the First Amendment, we've got the exemption clause, we've got all those things that make it very clear that. But at the same time, let me just kind of semi-push back, if I could. Obviously, the founders did not want a denomination over the nation. Would that be true?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely true.
Yeah. But
part of that was because different states had different beliefs.
Yeah.
And they didn't want the federal government to be picking which of those states was right.
Exactly.
Maryland was Roman Catholic, Massachusetts was Calvinist, and you don't want the federal government to be sort of the decider there.
Exactly. Well, I hope, Alexander, you'll be able to make an appearance on our show at least once a month, if that's possible. I'm not trying to put you on the spot right now, but maybe we could talk a little bit more and about having you on a regular spot here, maybe the first Wednesday of every month, because I think you bring some panache and some class to the show, of which, of course, I can neither of those things.
I don't know if I can live up to either of those things, but and you did ask me off the air, so this is not the first time I'm being asked. But I would love to come once a month. Well,
that'd be great, and I'd much rather have you than most of the guys out there. But let me also say this: I hope you're able to make our Lex Rex conference in May and be able to talk a little bit about Lex Rex to the congregation and to the visiting pastors that are there. I think, why would I have a Lex Rex conference without having the Lex Rex Institute represented?
Fair enough. And I've cleared my calendar. I will be there.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you very much, Alexander Haberbush, for being here today. And again, if anybody wants to get a hold of the Lex Rex Institute, how would they do that, sir?
LexRex.org is going to be sort of your central hub for everything we do. That includes legal help. It includes our podcast, our YouTube videos, our articles, however you want to learn about the Constitution, LexRex.org. LexRex.org.
Well, amen. Thank you, Alexander, for joining us today on Politics in the Pulpit. Lord bless you, and hopefully we'll see you in another month.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great day. And again, thank you so much today for tuning in to Politics in the Pulpit. Let me just give you a few shameless plugs here before we close out the show. If you are looking for a school that is going to educate your kids and not indoctrinate your kids, I'd encourage you to look for Lighthouse Christian Academy. Lighthouse Christian Academy is located in Santa Clarita, and Christine Aragon will be your contact information. She is our school administrator. And we will continue to add grades to that, by the way, as the Lord leads and as student bodies come in. If you're looking for a church to worship at that is traditional and is not going to scare your grandmother, that will be Freedom's Way Baptist Church. We've been located in Santa Clarita for 21 years. This will be my 21st year in the ministry this coming March. And I encourage you to come out to any one of our services, 9:15 for Sunday School All Ages, 10:30 a.m. For main worship services, and 5 o'clock for the evening Sunday service. And we also have a 7 p.m. midweek service at Wednesdays. And we're going through the book of James. Also, you heard my conversation with Alexander about our upcoming Lex Rex conference. That is May 22nd and 23rd. That is a Monday evening at 7 o'clock and a Tuesday morning at 9:30. Our speaker will be Jared Longshore of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. They had a huge interview with NBC Meet the Depressed a few months ago, and they were the topic of discussion there on that program for a while. And that kind of put them on the map, even though COVID technically did that in 2020 and 2021. But Jared's been a guest on this program as well in the last few weeks. And I'd ask you also to just pray for his daughter. One of his kids had a medical emergency just a few days ago. I think she's doing much better, but nevertheless, I encourage you to pray for Jared Longshore's daughter. Her name escapes you right now, but guess what? The Lord knows the name. And then if you're interested in that conference, you can go onto Facebook and check it out, and we'll have more information to come out on that. Also, if you're interested in listening to any of the meetings we had with Russ Miller last Sunday, you can find those on Facebook. All three services of Doubting Darwin and a few other things, Noah's Ark and dinosaurs, that hopefully will be of interest to you. And keep in mind, Politics in the Pulpit is here because you listen. Lord willing, you'll continue to tell some folks about the show, and we'll do our best to thread the needle between politics and the pulpit. It's amazing some of the backlash I get from some of the folks thinking I shouldn't even be talking about political issues, but of course I'm sitting in a radio station, not my pulpit, but nevertheless, encourage you to come out and listen next week. Again, you're listening to Politics the Pulpit here on your hometown station, AM 1220 and 98.1 FM. We will catch you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Take care.